Hey everybody, it's Scott Shetler and welcome to this week's episode of Strength and Health TV. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, and that's training. We're going to get into a little bit about how I train myself, my personal philosophies about training, as well as how I've trained some of the people that I've worked with, from athletes to general health and fitness and everything in between. So I want to get started. Basically, my philosophy on training is to keep things simple. And by doing so, we don't just focus on one aspect of personal development. A lot of people just focus their training on physical development, but I believe training needs to be holistic, and I think it needs to take into account every aspect of one's being. So it may sound cliche, but I really believe training needs to focus on the development of the body, mind, and spirit, and not just the body. Over the last few years, I've kind of built my training philosophy or come up with this training philosophy and gotten away from some things that I used to believe in when I was just focused on getting as strong as possible at the expense of all other things, namely my health. When I was just focused on competing in powerlifting and training for powerlifting, I was definitely getting stronger, I was definitely getting bigger, but as I talked about in one of the previous episodes, my health wasn't exactly improving. So as my strength was going up, my health was going the other way. So that caused me to kind of step back and look at what I was doing, where I wanted to go long term with my training, and some of the things that I wanted to bring my focus on, both personally as well as for my business and working in the health and fitness industry. Like I mentioned before, oftentimes fitness and health have become separated, especially nowadays as we look at where the industry is going. Unfortunately, more and more, as fitness and performance goes this way, health goes this way, and at the end of one's athletic career or one's competitive career, they're often left with pretty poor health and a lot of injuries. So I decided that I didn't personally want to go that route. That's why I stopped focusing solely on becoming the best that I could in powerlifting, and I wanted to step back a little bit and focus on development of some other aspects of myself that I was neglecting. Things like flexibility, mobility. I wanted to get into different things, different types of personal development like meditation. I wanted to pursue some interests in the internal martial arts and things like that. So I wanted to bring those aspects in and kind of make my personal approach to training a little bit more well-rounded, with the main focus being on health and not just absolute strength. But don't think that I'm not interested in strength. I still want to get stronger. I just want to make sure that I don't neglect the other areas, so I'm focused a little bit more on kind of well-rounded well-being, as my friend Stick likes to say. So I went from focusing solely on getting stronger for powerlifting, for improving my squat, bench, and deadlift. I kind of dialed that back a little bit, and I started incorporating other forms of training, namely the internal martial art practice of Tai Chi Chuan. And then I also, in addition to that, was studying Qigong as well as meditation. To kind of bridge the two there, I did focus a little bit more on mobility, flexibility, and things like that I had lost when I was just focused on my powerlifting training. And what I found was that as I lost some body weight, as I improved my mobility, as I improved my flexibility, not only was I recovering better, I was feeling better, and I was just overall in a much better place from a physical standpoint. That also coupled with a much healthier approach to nutrition and diet. So I can't remember when this all happened, but I know I used this as the title of an article in one of my books for this project that I started called Plant-Based Performance. Just a real quick note, Plant-Based Performance is a project that I started to help support animal welfare, and basically what it is right now we've got 2 books that are co-authored with numerous other plant-based athletes, health and fitness pros, and activists. And what it is everybody's individual articles make up the content for these 2 books, and then as the books sell, 100% of the sales goes to various animal welfare organizations. So in the very first book, I titled my article Eat Plants, Lift Iron, Meditate. And the reason that I used that title was I forgot somebody had asked me to name to describe my training philosophy in like 5 words or less, or something like that. And I thought about it for a second. I said, well, I eat plants, I like to lift weights, and I like to meditate, and I like to focus on my Tai Chi and Qigong practice. So I thought that's about as simple as I can say it. Eat plants, lift iron, meditate. And I've always kind of liked that approach, that simplicity of it all. So that became the article for that became the title for this article that I used for my submission for the first plant-based performance book. And that kind of stuck with me as the core, the foundation of how I train myself, as well as my own personal training philosophy. And if we kind of look at that, that kind of encompasses everything that I believe we need to focus on for total human development. And as this kind of philosophy started to develop and grow, and I started thinking about it more and trying things out, I was talking to my Tai Chi teacher one day about just overall health in America. He's from China. He actually grew up training in the Shaolin Temple. He's a 31st generation indoor disciple of the temple, and was actually, he trained directly under the last spiritual abbot of the temple. Shi Su Chi was his teacher's name, and my teacher is Shi Daru. I call him Shifu. And as I was talking to him one day, I asked him, I said, because he's very much into the development of health and well-being, I said to him, I said, why is it that nowadays we have access, because of the internet, because of books, publications, we've got access to more information regarding health, regarding fitness, regarding diet and nutrition, yet all you hear about are the instances of chronic disease are on the rise. Even you're hearing about possibilities of teenagers having adult onset diabetes, type 2 diabetes. Everybody's talking about the weight problem in America. Obesity rates are higher. Why is it that we have access to all this information, yet we're not healthy? We're not taking advantage of this information and using it properly. And he said that the focus, in his opinion, the focus has always been superficial. The focus always tends to be on the external development. And if you think about that, when you go to the newsstand and grab a magazine on fitness or health, all you see are pictures of six-packs, of big arms, the latest increase your bench press by 50 pounds routine or whatever, but the focus is always superficial. It's always focused on the external with very little regard for internal development. And when I say internal development, I'm kind of, walking the fine line and starting to talk about self-help and self-development and stuff like that, but it really is about self-development, self-awareness, self-cultivation. And when we just focus on getting that six-pack, the bigger arms and things like that, we're not necessarily always going to be happy. We can always get leaner, we can always get bigger and more muscular, we can always get stronger. There's always going to be that striving. And I'm not saying it's not good to have a goal. It's not good to be concerned about physical appearance. I mean, it is. We face it. A lot of us got into lifting weights because of our childhood heroes like Arnold, or some people like the big WWF wrestlers at the time. Some people like the athletes, that were big, muscular, capable of amazing feats of strength and performance, and that's cool. But I think that it's really important to focus on the development of yourself and not necessarily compare yourself to Arnold, not necessarily compare yourself to your favorite athlete or whatever. And that's not to say that if you participate in an athletic endeavor, if you're a bodybuilder, obviously you're going to need to get bigger or leaner. If you're a powerlifter, you're going to need to get stronger. If you're an athlete, you need to perform better. I'm not saying you shouldn't focus on that. Don't lose sight of developing yourself along the way. It's a very important part of overall development. And when you just put your focus into developing the physical, oftentimes our psychological, our spiritual, our internal development gets put by the wayside. And no matter what you do, you're never going to be happy. So I think that's what he was talking about. He made the comment about how if you go into gyms or fitness centers nowadays, you see people just grinding on the treadmill, you see people lifting weights. One of the things that they're not doing is they're not breathing, they're not taking time to de-stress. You think about the average person in corporate America working insanely long hours at the office, 10, 12 plus hours a day. You throw on the responsibility of family, having to rush here to pick up your kids, take your kids to sports practice, making sure everybody gets fed, everybody gets picked up on time and dropped off on time. It's constantly rush, go. We live in this really fast-paced society. Nobody really takes the time to step back, to calm down, to detach from all those distractions and just sit and breathe and just be with yourself without some type of distraction, whether it's your phone, whether it's your computer, whether it's your TV. nobody takes the time to just sit quietly with themselves. And I think the notion of that freaks a lot of people out, because you have to start coming to terms with you. And in a society where we're so distracted and so pulled every way, and how we get so absorbed in the things that we're doing, work, professional life, personal life, and things like that, we're constantly giving of ourselves. We very rarely take the time to ourselves to kind of get centered, to sit, to breathe, to try not to think about things, and to just be completely aware in the present moment, i.e. meditation. And when we neglect the development of that side of ourselves and just put all the effort into physical development, I don't think we're ever going to be totally happy. There's always more. There's always striving. There's always trying to get more, to do more, to be more. And again, I'm not saying don't have goals. I'm not saying don't have plans for the future. But what I am saying is take some time every day to tune in and be totally present and learn to meditate. Add in some type of practice, some type of other self-development practice to your physical training. And I think in doing so, you'll find that you take a more well-rounded approach to your personal development. So that's what I got from my Tai Chi teacher when I was talking to him after class one day. And I think it is something that needs to be focused on if we're to totally realize what true health is and realize our full human potential. And I think by doing so, it's not just going to carry over to our health and fitness, but it's going to carry over to all aspects of our lives. If we can focus better, we're going to be more productive in our professional life. We're going to be more attentive in our personal life, and such. So that's kind of an overview of my philosophy of training. We can get into the specifics and stuff like that, but basically, for myself, I focus on the strength and cardiovascular training. I focus on, and with that I focus on various flexibility and mobility and restorative exercise. I focus on my Qigong and Tai Chi practice, and I focus on meditation. That, coupled with a healthy plant-based diet, is what I try to balance in my daily and weekly training, or daily and weekly physical and personal development. And when it comes to training, I really think we have to differentiate. Are we training for some type of athletic or competitive event? Because that obviously will dictate how we train, what we do, for performance enhancement. And then, are we just training for health, general well-being and things like that? So I think making sure that you know what your goal is, having a clearly defined goal as you develop your training program, is going to make it much more successful. And I always, I've always believed that simplicity will always win. Being able to do the most you can with the least training possible, the least number of exercises, the least number of variations, because it makes it so much easier to evaluate what it is you're doing. If you're doing 20,000 different things, you're not going to know what's working and what isn't. And that way, if you do a training cycle for 4 weeks and you're only focused on a few exercises, and certain ones are working and certain ones aren't, it's going to be much easier to revamp your program to make it more effective as you go. So I always think, one, simplicity is the way to go when it comes to training. That's why when I train and when I train people, I focus on just basic exercises. We don't really get into the advanced stuff until you need it. I like to build my training around basic body weight movement and the simple barbell and free weight exercises, things like squats, deadlifts, presses, pulls, pull-ups, and exercises of those sorts. I think the same approach when it comes to cardiovascular training or development. Go out and run. Go out to a trail, get outside, walk, run, sprint, various cardio like that. I find it much more rewarding than getting on a treadmill or a stationary bike and going nowhere. One of the things that I've gotten into for higher intensity interval training is using weighted sleds. Everybody knows the famous Prowler, the weighted sled that people get out and push, or they sprint with it. I use some different dragging sleds and things like that you can load up with weight. I love that type of training, and I like, if I'm going to go out and run, I want to go out and run. I've got a cool trail that a bunch of motocross guys use behind where my training facility is here in Atlanta. I like to go out and run that. I'd rather be outside doing something for cardio than just being on a treadmill kind of running and going nowhere. Now, that's not to say that doing some work on a treadmill is a bad thing to do. I'd rather get out and be outside and be in nature as opposed to just being on that hamster wheel going round and round. So again, simplicity for me is always the key. I find I can get much more out of doing some deadlifts, doing some 1 or 2 exercises for the back side of the back and the posterior chain, the lower back glutes, hamstrings, some abs, and then going out and doing some high intensity cardio, pushing the prowler or the sled, or doing some trail running or something. I find I can squeeze more out of that than trying to do 15 exercises in one workout. So again, simplicity has always been a better approach for me than complexity. So that's kind of what I focus on when it comes to training. I also focus on that when I'm training clients, athletes, general health and wellness. It doesn't matter. I tend to build programs around about 4 or 5, maybe 6 exercises, and we focus on getting the most we can out of those exercises. So simplicity in training is always going to win, in my opinion, hands down over anything else. And when it comes to simplicity, the basic movements, the basic barbell movements, lifting barbells, dumbbells, doing body weight, you're always going to get more out of those exercises than some fad type of fitness or anything like that. So by focusing on the basics, by rounding out your personal practice with some type of mind and spirit cultivation exercise, whether you get into yoga, whether you just do seated meditation, whether you get into Qigong or Tai Chi Chuan or something like that, do something that does incorporate some movement. That's why I love Tai Chi personally, because it is an internal form of martial arts. We do various type of forms and things like that depending on the style. I study both Yang and Chen style. Some of the movements, the stances can be very deep and very physically taxing, but because the focus is on smooth flow, timing your breathing with the exercises and bringing your focus into what you're doing right at that point in time, it becomes like a moving meditation, because it brings it, the forms, the Tai Chi forms become an anchor into the present moment. So that's where, if you've ever heard of Tai Chi as a moving meditation, that's kind of where that idea comes from. By doing the movements and focusing on them, it just brings you totally aware, totally present, and it brings your attention into the here and now. I also think that's why people enjoy things like heavy weightlifting, like rock climbing and other extreme sports, because when you add that element of danger, when you're hanging off the side of a cliff, you're not really focused on what you've got to do at work on Monday, or that test that you got coming up, or the person who just dumped you. You're kind of focused on not falling, and that brings your awareness to the here and now. So even if that's not the focus, I really think that's part of the addiction, or part of the appeal to a lot of those activities and a lot of those sports for people. So doing things like that is fantastic, and I think when you're aware of the fact that you're being aware, that you are being totally present, that's only to your benefit. That's not to say that it negates the importance of things like seated meditation, but that's a way to make a hobby, a sport, a physical activity, a meditative practice, because it does bring your attention into the here and now, and I think that's a great thing. Lift a heavy weight, you try to go for a record squat or a record bench press, your focus is right here on what you're doing. That's one of the things that I always enjoyed about powerlifting competition. When they call your name up, the bar's loaded, there's a weight on the squat bar that you've never lifted before, and you're going to go out and either make it or miss it. But man, your attention is 100% in the here and now. I often, walking out to the bar, I didn't even notice the spectators that were out there. I noticed the bar, I noticed the head judge, and I noticed the commands, and that was it. I was totally zoned in. And I think that's, when you hear athletes talk about the zone, it's that type of focus, that bringing attention to here and now. And there's ways to access it too, through practices like seated meditation, through other practices like yoga or Qigong or Tai Chi Chuan, good healthy practices, which I find to be a very successful component in a well-rounded training or health and fitness program. So when it comes to training, again, I really think that the focus should be on simplicity, and the focus should be on well-rounded kind of well-being exercise, to make sure that you're focusing not just on physical development, but focused on bringing the mind and the spirit and the body together. and making sure that you're devoting equal amounts of time to those practices. I think you also have to look at how old are you. Younger people can probably get away with more frequent training sessions, and I think the older we get, particularly after about 35, as we start closing in on 40 and older, I think that it might be a better idea to maybe cut back a little bit on the frequency of high intensity exercise and start to add in more restorative exercises. I think things like light Indian club swinging is a fantastic form of restoration. Stretching, mobility, other restorative practices like using saunas and hot tubs and contrast showers, getting regular massage and body work and things like that. We need to focus on taking care of the body. Nutrition is a huge restorative tool. If you're eating crap, you're not going to repair, you're not going to rebuild as effectively after training. So as we get older, I think more and more restoration becomes important. I don't think that it needs to be neglected when you're younger, but I think you can get away with more when you're younger because you do bounce back faster, you do recover better from intense training. It's easier to train hard, things like lack of sleep, poor nutrition, and things like that. I think this stuff becomes more and more important as we get older. But that's not to say that if you're young, you should neglect restoration. I think you should eat as healthy as you can. I think you should focus on stretching and mobility and make sure you're developing that range of motion so you don't lose that kind of stuff as you start to age. One of the other things that you have to consider as you get older is the decline in your body's natural hormone production. There's some professionals in the industry, Mike Mahler is somebody who comes to mind, who like to talk about optimizing your hormones and things like that through the use of different supplements, through training and restorative practices and things like that. Mike has tons of great resources on his website. I think it's MikeMahler.com or AggressiveStrength.com or Mahler's Aggressive Strength. I apologize, I don't know his website off the top of my head, but if you Google Mike Mahler and hormone optimization, it'll take you to his website. He's got a bunch of articles, he's got a bunch of videos. I think he's got some videos that you can even order from his lectures and things like that. He offers a wide variety of supplements as well to help with hormone optimization. That's one thing that you do need to consider as you get older, and why just trashing your body all the time with heavy training and not doing anything on the restorative side it's not a great idea. I remember Mike interviewed a gentleman named Steve Maxwell a while back. Steve, I believe, is in his 60s now. He's well known in the physical fitness industry. He's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He was a very high-level trainer, and he's just all in all a brilliant guy when it comes to physical development. I really appreciated one of his more recent interviews with Mike where they talked about, Steve and his training now that he's in his 60s. He finds that he does better with less frequent, high-intense training, but he made the comment that he does something every day. That doesn't mean you need to go out and bang weights really hard every day. Maybe 2 heavy weight training sessions a week, and then you focus on movement, focus on flexibility, focus on mobility, focus, just getting out and moving. And that can really be something that you need to consider as you start to get older and optimizing your approach to physical development and health and fitness. So the topic of training, we could go on all day, and a lot of these things I plan to talk about in future episodes of this video blog, but kind of what I wanted to do today was just give you an idea about my personal philosophy when it comes to training, some of the things that have worked for me, why I feel simplicity is the best, and when it comes to developing your program, making sure to focus on all aspects of human development. Again, making training holistic, making training about the mind, the body, and the spirit, as opposed to just focusing on the physical, if you want to be well-rounded, if you want to have total development. That's been something that I've focused on over the last few years, and I just turned 40 a few weeks ago. I feel better. I definitely recover better because I am optimizing my training, because I am doing things better nutritionally, because I am trying to focus on rest, and I am adding in other practices like Qigong, like Tai Chi, like meditation and things like that to make my approach to development a little bit more holistic. I think that's a topic that, does apply to everybody. More people that I talk to, especially as we're getting older, are a little bit more focused on health than just appearance. And again, that's not to say that looking good as a result of physical activity is a bad thing. But what I found is that people that focus on taking care of the inside, people that learn to calm down, people that learn to de-stress, people that focus on meditation, people that focus on putting good, clean foods into the body and making sure that the body has good nutrition to rebuild and turn over on. When you do those things, that often tends to reflect in the external, when a lot of times you're only focused on external development. It doesn't always mean that you're going to be healthy. One of my friends and colleagues, Dr. Luke Pack, in one of his lectures one time, he made a statement where he said, health is something we often go through on the way to fitness. And I don't think it needs to be that way. I think health is something that should be cultivated as we develop our fitness. And I really think the only way to do that is to have this more holistic, this more well-rounded approach to our personal development. I had if you're familiar with Indian club training, you might have heard the name Dr. Ed Thomas. Dr. Thomas is probably one of my biggest influences in all of physical culture. I've got many people, and I'll devote one episode to just talking about my mentors and people I've learned from and things like that. But the one thing that I really like and appreciate about Dr. Thomas is this guy, I don't know how old he is, I'm going to venture to say he's in his 60s, maybe even his 70s. You wouldn't know it by looking at the guy. The guy, he moves like a panther. He's incredibly mobile, he's very relaxed, he's got a great demeanor, and the guy has forgotten more about physical culture, fitness, and training than I'm ever going to learn in my lifetime. And I did have the pleasure one time when he was down here in Atlanta, he came to my training center, and there was only about 3 or 4 of us, so we got a private audience with him one afternoon for about 3 or 4 hours, which was amazing. We focused on Indian club training, Indian club swinging drills, as well as we got into some types of inversion training and things like that. And he talked a lot about just health and fitness and how things were back in the day when he was getting into it and how they are now. And one of the things that he said, it kind of goes along with that statement that Dr. Pack made about health is something that we go through on the way to fitness. Dr. Thomas said fitness shouldn't hurt. And too often, nowadays it's all about the grind. It's all about, no pain, no gain, and things like that. And I think that having that kind of macho of an approach when it comes to our training, I can see how in a way it might be good, but I think it's mostly bad because we start to think that pain, this constant state of soreness and pain is something that we need to be in all the time, and it doesn't need to be that way. I think as we get, when you're young and you're kind of, your testosterone's up here and you're ready to take on the world, maybe that's one thing, you recover a little bit better, whatever. But as you get older, you start to look at the quality of your life, and you want to be active, you want to be mobile, you don't want to be, in a wheelchair or on a walker in the later stages of your life. That doesn't mean that we can't continue to lift weights. It doesn't mean that we can't, continue to run. It doesn't mean that we can't be physically engaged. I want to be physically engaged through the later stages of my life, all the way up until the day that it's time for me to leave this life. I want to go, and then boom, that be it. I don't want to decline and be in a wheelchair or in a walker or anything over the last decade of my life. I just don't want to be that way. I want to be physically engaged. I want to train people up until the day I want to help people. So when he said fitness shouldn't hurt, that really made me step back and think about what I was doing and how I needed to change to be more in line with my personal beliefs. Now again, you might have a different opinion. You may think that it's hardcore, balls to the wall, and that's fine. I'm just trying to share, my personal experiences, how I felt that I've gotten better over the last, 3, 4, 5 years that I've started changing my philosophy. And these are just my takes on training. Now, this isn't exactly what I do with, the athletes that I train. I've got some very high-level powerlifters. I got some high-level competitive athletes. When we're talking about people who are out there in competition, when you're trying, to be a world champion, a record holder, it's different. The focus is on the physical development, the development of speed, the development of agility, the development of power, the development of strength, all the things that are required, all the physical, development things that are required for you to perform at the highest level in your chosen sport or your chosen competition. That's different. I'm talking about, people, the old fogies like me, who are just looking at improved health and well-being. And I think, one of the big mistakes athletes make too is they do neglect their health. They don't necessarily eat that well all the time. They neglect sleep. They neglect, they might abuse certain performance enhancers to be the best at their given sport. So those are all things, I really think that get overlooked because the athlete's focus is just on winning. So that's a different animal. So I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is the average person who wants to have healthy, higher quality of life throughout the later stages of their life so that they can be happier, be more productive, and be able to enjoy hobbies and things like that they participate in. I remember being in a powerlifting meet in Atlanta. I don't remember what year it was, maybe 06 or 07, something like that. And I was in the bathroom after we pulled our deadlifts, and I was getting out of my deadlift suit, and there was a guy standing there as we were changing clothes. He was an older guy. He had kind of grayish hair and a beard. And I remember seeing him deadlift, and I think he had pulled somewhere around 350 or 370. And I'm thinking this guy's like 65, mid-60s or something like that. I thought that was a pretty damn good deadlift. I was really impressed. I said to him, hey man, that was an awesome deadlift. Congrats. And he said, well, thanks. And I said, so what'd you end up benching and squatting? And he said, well, I benched, 250 or something like that. And he said, I haven't squatted because I blew my knee out back when I was in my 60s. And I said, back when you were in your 60s? I said, how old are you? The guy was 81 years old. And here I thought the guy was in his mid-60s. So he blew his knee out in his 60s, so he can't squat anymore. The guy's freaking 81 years old, and he's pulling in the mid-3s, he's benching in the mid-2s. It was awesome. And I thought, that's so cool. Here's a guy that's able to perform well for the sport that he loves, powerlifting, and the guy's in his 80s. So I really don't think that if we do the right things, there's no reason that we can't be like that. There's no reason we can't do the things that we love and continue to push ourselves to get better for where we're at. So in a nutshell, in conclusion, I just want you the takeaway I want from this episode to be is that training needs to be focused, our focus on training needs to be a little bit more holistic, and that we shouldn't, that just focusing on physical development is, I believe, a mistake. I think that we need to incorporate other practices that allow us to de-stress, that allow us to work on other aspects of our own personal development, and focus a little bit more on things outside of the gym. I think it's a mistake to just focus on lifting weights all the time. And I couldn't have said it better than when somebody asked me to define my philosophy on training. I couldn't find a better thing to say than eat plants, lift iron, meditate. So hopefully you enjoyed today's episode. Hopefully it's making you think a little bit about your training and maybe some things that you can do to enhance your training and your overall development. And in future episodes, I'd like to get a little bit more into some different specific training philosophies instead of making it so general. So again, I hope you're enjoying these Strength and Health TV episodes. I'm going to try to do about one a week and keep pumping them out. And some of the things that we're going to be looking at in the future, I'm going to start doing some interviews with people, start to get other people's point of view on some of these topics that we're talking about, and hopefully get into some other cool topics as well. So if there's anything that you want me to address, leave it in the comments section below. And until next time, stay strong and healthy.